Perfect. Okay, so my name is Rob. I'm with the University of Pikeville. I'm the campus chaplain, hence the caller, and also do an associate dean of health economics, which is a new role. But when was teaching full load, I would start all of my courses with science, help us kind of go to space. You know, if you happen to like me, try to bring a lot into space, whatever it is, joys or concerns, or the last text you got, or things you got to do when you go home. So let's just ground ourselves in the holy experience. If my students no, so okay. Well, I had this great, we're going to listen to some monks chant, but we can't do that because I don't have sound. So what this is not, there's a cool movement right now. There's a guy at the University of Penn. He's teaching some courses on living deliberately, how to live as a monk. This is not that. That'd be cool. But I can't get my students to be a month tech free and things like that they are doing at Penn. I aspire to do something like that, but I'm not. But if you're interested in that kind of, if you saw this presentation, you said, oh, that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. You want to look up this scholar. He has a class also called Existential Despair, where they'll do like they'll spend an evening together and they read through a book, and then and it's a fascinating kind of model what they're doing there at Penn, which is not an ACA school. But anyways, Saint Benedict. If you don't know who Saint Benedict is, I'll kind of give you a little history. He is the patron saint of Europe. He has a feast day. Some people claim him as the father of monasticism. He's really not. But near Rome, he was in a time when people were looking at the ultimate spiritual life was being this hermit all by yourself. And Benedict had this idea that after some of his own experiences, that really we grew best in community. It was actually harder to be in community. And maybe later, if you're going to be a hermit, you could do that, but really it needs to be formed in the community. And being a person who was married with 5 children and my mother lives with me, I can say there's something about living in the community that does form you and shape you, right? They would probably explain it a little differently than I would. Because the goal is how do we grow to learn, to love in deeper ways. And I suspect that I may be using the language of Benedictine spirituality here in a minute, but I think that everybody we encounter has that hunger to grow deeper in that, in authentic expression of to know self and know others, right? Yeah, and again, that community is the pathway of how we're transformed spiritually. So that's kind of some of the goals. Here is the rule. Mine's not as pretty as my brother's, but he's got a nicer edition. I don't have the cheapest one, but it's a real small text, okay? Which we'll talk about here in a second. And the rule, okay? There were all kinds of other manuals out there on how to live together and how to kind of live a way of life. There was a much bigger one called the Way of the Master that Benedict appears to be adapting from and brought it down. Benedict is really good at making things more simple. Kind of the goal is to live on a middle way rather than these extremes, which I think, and you'll catch this vibe in the whole talk is, man, let's see on to something. And like in these moments of extremes in America, it's like that middle way. Could we just be there? So yeah, trying to live in the middle. How do we create an order for holiness, growth in holiness? Right? There could be a process to it. And yeah, so and of course, of the different types of rules, this is the most famous. today to try to, go to Barnes and Noble and get the Way of the Master, you're probably not. But if you've got a nice Barnes and Noble, you could see this one copy there in the midst of some of their spiritual texts. People have been using this for 1,500 years. And so obviously it has some staying power to it. 73 chapters. Chapter 7 is probably the most famous chapter, a really lengthy conversation about humility. And a lot of people have lifted that from it. And it's more than just conduct. This is not like a rule book, really, when it comes to the classic way you think of a rule. You can think of ordered ways for life. And I would argue that even in the most loose or spontaneous groups, we still have some rules for life that you probably live by. Now, some of my colleagues would maybe offer some objections. So I just wanted to name the objections that people might have in this space. It's too old, right? I mean, have we looked at the latest trends in higher ed? Right? I think that just because it's brand new doesn't mean it's really good this is for monks, not for real people. Is anybody in here a confessed member of a religious community, celibate, no possessions, anybody? Yeah, me neither. People say this is like a deeply Christian thing, so maybe non-religious or non-Christian, this is not people appropriate. And people say that there are plenty of rules for life. Why do we need this one? And of course, the big one, we work in universities, we don't work in monasteries. Okay? But I want to kind of work through those because as we think about what it means to be in a community that has such a sacred privilege of getting people at some of their most formative time, how do we operate together in a way that actually becomes a really life-giving community for people? Because I know that especially if our schools cannot buy into the fact that we're doing more than just getting people degrees, we're going to close our doors because Purdue, higher ed, global, they can get degrees too. We're trying to do something a little bit more than that, right? More than just giving people degrees. So this is ancient wisdom. It's part of the Western canon. This focuses on virtue, and I know I'm looking at some people coming in schools where y'all teach that you already think about this, but I know at my school and some others, that's not a topic we're talking about all the time. We're not talking about the development of virtue. We're talking more about career readiness and those types of things. And I think the reason why this is so helpful is it really avoids the fads of today. It's way beyond all of that. And of course, there's 400 monasteries out there that are still using this, 20,000 different professed adherence to the text, and there are also some Benedictine schools, right? So overall, what is this text arguing for? And rather than lifting up kind of direct quotes from the rule, I just want to talk about general themes that we're going to see in this. And the first one is how we think about community. First thing, the community has to be intentional, right? It's not going to create itself. It has to be intentional. And there are shared activities that shape us. And I'm coming from a school where we've lost convocation. And I know y'all, what's the requirement for 2 days a week, 3 days a week? How many days? Yeah, 2 days a week. 2 days a week. And everything shuts down, and y'all. Oh, please. Look, we at my university, we still have Tuesday, Thursdays at 11 o'clock, there are no classes, which used to be kind of sacred time, but that hasn't been in a long time. So we don't really have any shared activities, right? There is no speaker that everyone's going to go to. And again, with this community, it's about relationship over productivity. There's also this sense of a centralized mission and focus, singularity of purpose. And I think for some of our schools that we don't have that exact singular focus of what we're doing. We're trying to reach a lot of things to a lot of people. But also this community is rooted and grounded in mutual sacrifice. All of us come into this knowing that the community is more important than the individual. And it's, again, I think the other interesting thing about the rule is how monks and nuns, when living in the community, spend most of the day in silence. And it's like, why would that be? How would we work this out at the university? Because I suspect if I said, hey, for 7 hours, and everyone's got to be quiet. That's not going to work super well. But what's the spirit of it? And the idea is that we're living in community, and it's so important to us that we don't always have to be distracted by the triviality of kind of the pointlessness of some of our small talk and things like that, right? And then the question I would have out of this first step of community is, what are our intentional ways that we are intentionally shaping the community? And I think about this in my aspect in student affairs, right? The programming that we're doing, what is the intended shaping and role of that? Is it more than just entertaining students or making sure that we have 100 people in the laser tag? What is the intention behind it, right? In our programming. So the first thing about the rule, of course, is community. Now, when we think about this, I want to kind of contextualize it in what we're seeing out of our students. We'll see if this would agree with you, right? The majority of college students today meet the criteria for some kind of mental health pain. I don't really like to use the word disorder, but they're having pain that they're bringing to the table. Oftentimes around anxiety, depression, substance abuse, loneliness, intense academic pressures, feeling kind of like they don't have a real direction in life. 80% of college students say they're struggling. 25% is 1 in 4 say they're struggling significantly. So does this connect with what you see on campus? And I thought this great Christian school did any problems, right? We're seeing this to the point that in my time at the university, I've been at the university 13 years, and when I was hired, it was like the chaplain will do all the kind of mental health stuff, and for a long time I did. But now we have 2 full-time therapists, plus a very robust online experience, and looking at adding a 3rd, and trying to figure out how to get psychiatry. And we're a small school. I'm looking at 1,150 undergrads plus our professional schools. So when we think about the couple things that I'm lifting up, I just want to really contextualize it in the midst of who I think this could really benefit, and it's our students, right? So when we think about Benedictine spirituality, we think about the vows of the Benedictine life, and the first one is stability. And when we think about stability, it means rooting and grounding and committing ourselves to one place. And I actually think this one has something for us to think about when it comes to in higher ed, when we commit ourselves to a place long term. I know that used to be the model. A professor would come in and then they're going to be there for 35 years. We've seen a lot of turnover. I don't know how you guys' places are, but in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of turnover, right? And even some people we've hired are encouraging young people to get out there and move jobs every couple of years, strengthen their resumes and move on. But I actually think that this is tagging in to what students are already feeling about the kind of the lostness and the anxiety. And when we're not rooted and grounded in one space in one place, and if students don't know that we're going to be a part of this institution for a while, I think that doesn't help create wellness. Right? I mean, it's like, I'm starting to build a relationship with you, but you may be gone next year. Right? Now, I'm not saying that, your appointment where you're at right now has to be your lifetime appointment, but is this something we should be thinking about? When we know that the tenure in higher ed is going down, I don't mean faculty tenure, but I mean the idea of how long we're staying in the place is coming down. And we live in a very rapidly changing culture, right? I mean, of course, we know the statistics on marriage, but I thought a couple other statistics were interesting. This idea of how long people are staying in their work, young people, particularly people from 25 to 34, about 2.5, almost 3 years, and then they're moving on. Okay. Length of marriage is about 8 years, and I just compared that to what we see when it comes to how long people live, or how long people are living now. And then also just what we're seeing is statistically people are less and less satisfied with their lives. So we feel that anxiety and we think, okay, now if I just go to this school as opposed to that school. But really, we learn from the text that there's about a stability of staying in place, holding that anxiety, working through that anxiety, and giving yourself faithfully to a kind of a mission and a purpose. So I think about this in issue, how do we create wellness on campus? What does this look like to intentionally partner with HR and to have these kind of conversations? How do we be a place where people want to stay, raise their families, live long, retire there. Like, how do we do that? And I know for me, so often faculty or staff may feel very disconnected from HR, but we have a responsibility to come back into our HR departments and say, let's partner together. How do we make this a climate that people really want to commit to long term? Because we know that's best for our students, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Moving on, I feel a lot of students are sad. This absolutely holds true for what I see. That there are 11 years. I always said, so which is occasionally, what is the common denominator, no matter where you go? You, right? So if you're just an unsatisfied person, and I'm not saying settle for poor treatment, bad wages, all that, but anxiety, I don't think people think it's a matter of location, which sure, but I'm interested because that's just something that came to me was that you can change where you are as much as you want, but if you don't change how you see things and who you are along the way, it's not really matter.
Yeah. And this is really about it, kind of holding up the, right? No, perfect. Because this is the tension in the rule, right? Is stability has value when you want to commit yourself to kind of place some people. But then also in that, you're committing to being converted. And when I use the word converted, I often have to think of religiously, it's like moving from this kind of point of view to this religious perspective, gave my life to Jesus. But I mean a little bit deeper than just when we think of that. It's how am I ever growing as a person? So hold that tension. How do I stay stable in the community and committed, but yet I'm growing as a person and somehow that has benefited me. Now, what this looks like is as we are rooted and grounded and stable in the community, I now trust you because you've been at Union for 11 or 12 years. And when you go to lunch saying, the growing edge could be raw, this, 75. I'm willing for you to hold that mirror up because that'd be really beneficial. I need to grow as a professional and think about this or that, or a person, right? And I think this is where we struggle in our culture, right? We struggle when other people hold the mirror up for us. Well, we live in a little less reflective society. We're so busy and distracted now. It's much harder for us to be thinking about what does this look like. I think how we model this is that growth is really, really normal. I should be changing. And I think about it in the midst of kind of the election season right now. One of the great gotchas always is to find a candidate that's changed their mind about something and say, look, you used to be for this and now you're not. And like, terrible, and you're such a popular. And it's like, that's actually normal. As long as it's not just for the whims of politics. But like, to see things differently when you get older makes sense, right? I should be growing. If I'm still 25-year-old inside in a 44-year-old body, like I'm doing it wrong, right? Like, so this is normal. Now, of course, with the rule, the goal is Christ, to be like Christ. Okay. When we don't have that kind of framework, we still can have some kind of model of what it looks like. What are we growing into? Any place can have a common model. And I think for many places in higher ed, we don't actually have a clear vision of what success or the graduated life looks like. We kind of leave people out on their own. And I think naming, or I believe that the rule challenges us to name our intention of how we're shaping people. And this is our agenda. We love you right now, but we want you to grow and change. Okay, but we're not going to leave you in the process. You hear how that stability works. And of course, this is the really edgy one, the vow of obedience. Like, how does that work? It's like, I'm about to leave. You don't know my boss. Inside of the monastery, inside of the religious community, you have an abbot who represents the Christ figure in the community. You are obedient to. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm obedient to my bishop. That's everything opposite my mountain identity, right? My mountain identity says no one tells me what to do. Thank you very much. But there's a role in obedience. And with that is clear, committed leadership. And when I think about people who are in the higher ed administration, as clear as possible. There's such kindness in it. And I think about hiring practices and hiring policies. I'll give you one example from hiring that maybe you've been a part of. How many of you have been a part of a hiring committee? Right? And you wonder, is this really a hiring committee, or is this kind of like a ruse because we already know who we're gonna hire? Have you ever been a part of something like that? Right? And then when they hire that person, you're like, oh, this is, just clear communication. Like you say, like, we already know who we're gonna hire or whatever, but then just think about how, and this is the direction we're going. I know a lot of times people kind of spur away that idea, but I think it can be a real gift. Be as clear as possible as a leader. Say this is our direction. Okay. Other couple things about this idea is that because leadership is such a sacred privilege, that we should be giving our students more credit for the leadership opportunities that they have. What does it look like to be able to earn credit to be the captain of the football team? Okay. And other types of leadership. I think we need to be thinking more about that. Because what we're asking is to say with our mouth, this is really important. And when you're obedient to a leader and you put the community above yourself, that has sacred value. And yet we're not honoring that then in the boldness and the risk of taking and being a leader and saying yes to what God is doing and positioning you in that spot. Okay. And of course, yeah, go ahead.
You said this is controversial. I'm never thought blind obedience, just because kind of thing. But the idea of obedience was just a reality of life. If I'm going to work in a job, there's certain things I just have to obey. I came out of the private school system, retired from there. There were rules I had to obey. Heck, they're going to be kind of cheeky about those old numbers on the side of the road that they have on the way home. I might see them as a suggestion, but some people are much teskier about it than that. I mean, the idea that obedience is not a necessary discipline of life seems odd to me. It is a necessary discipline of life. And doesn't necessarily mean blind obedience, like a cult.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what some people feel when they think of obedience, when they think about the traditional marriage vows, the wife is a future husband kind of thing. But also, I do believe that you and I are closer in age than probably to our college students. And I suspect that we have been cultured in a different season where there was a very clear hierarchy. And hierarchy is very much, I think, we're seeing very much challenged.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Right? But I think it creates the anxiety and the confusion, right? Because clarity creates some order and structure. Right? I know you're the boss, you're gonna call the shot in the end. Okay. Right? So I think that the more we kind of get into less clear leadership, that's what we're creating more anxiety. So, but you're right. I mean, go the speed limit. It would much be better for your life. Yeah, I know. Hospitality. The rule is all about hospitality. To me, this is the great gift of Benedictine spirituality. Is the guest in front of me is Christ presenting Christ's self to me. So when I'm in my office and a student comes in, even though I'm really busy, there's Christ. This is a real challenge to me. I'm a pretty clear guy that likes to stack my day, and I don't like to leave much margin, even though I've read a lot of spiritual books that say that's helpful. When people come in and interrupt my schedule, I'm super flexible at times. And so we think about this from the moment a student walks on campus to admissions, who are probably the most friendly people on campus, right? That's kind of their job, to the business office, to the email with disability office, to all of that. What does it look like to create a campus environment that's rooted and grounded in hospitality? Right? And think about it. If I'm coming into your space and I'm already dealing with high levels of anxiety, this is a way of beginning to help ease my anxiety. If you're seeing me like Christ, and I'm not coming in as a burden or a problem or anything you say. And I think that I suspect that everyone in here, and if I were to go out and see the others who are here, no one thinks that they're putting that vibe off. That they're communicating that people are a bother. But many of us happen to do that by the way our offices are shaped. The nonverbal when a student comes in the door is like, yes, I've got 5 minutes, right? Or how we respond in email. Have you ever gotten a passive aggressive email from a coworker? Once or twice? Have you ever sent one? I know I have. Okay. So, also in this community mindset, guests come and guests are treated as, Christ before us, but also there is a practice in there. So when you come in, we're not going to disrupt everything, but we are going to bring you in and allow you to explore and listen and learn and participate as you want without having to make a hard commitment. And to me, that kind of environment creates a sense of safe exploration. Okay. So coming as you are is important. Work. Are any of you work campuses? Yeah, I know Union's not, Lee's not. You're not like Berea, are you? Okay, I guess not. Okay. This one I've been thinking a lot about because in the Benedictine world, work has incredible value. Everyone has a part to play. Now, of course, work is always rooted and grounded around prayer. Okay? So we work for a while, we pray, and work for a while, we pray. Prayer sets the pace and it informs our work. But there are a couple interesting things that, because everyone's job has a function and purpose, everyone has a part to play. And you and I both know in a culture of wellness, people have to believe that what they do matters. This is why we see a lot of students who are struggling maybe with depression, they're in their dorms, actually have sometimes less commitments than other students. Maybe they're not on a team, maybe they're not taking care of 2 kids. And one of the things they're really struggling with is, if I don't get up and go to class today, it's not really going to change anything. My work has to matter. And then we value the different types of work that are on campus. In the world I'm coming from, I saw this in Christian ministry a lot with churches that the jobs that really were important. Of course, number one was missionary. Missionary are really hard places. That was the most important thing. And then there are your pastors and teachers who worked in Christian schools, and there was all this hierarchy. And if you had a regular secular job, that was less important, kind of over there, as opposed to seeing, God's involvement with everything and all work. But interestingly enough, if you start loving your work too much, then you'll be replaced in that job and assigned something else. This challenges the workaholic culture of higher education. You probably haven't picked that up, have you? Higher ed loves to work people 24/7, particularly mission-driven higher ed. It's for the cause, or it's just the season. We're having a lot of transition right now. We're going to have to work for a while. You're like, this season's been 11 years, right? And then, of course, campus work has to be more than just financial aid. It has to be more than just a way to pay the bills. And that's my own pet peeve right now. I'm really kind of thinking about how does health and wellness get more involved with our work study experiences? Because it matters. I think we're almost at time. We end at 2:30. Is that when we end? I mean, people ended a lot of time. Most people ended at lunch, but I mean, for us, okay, perfect. Of course, the role of study. I think that goes without saying. The rule has set times for the monks to read particular spiritual books, study the Bible, of course. Even advice to not read out loud has to disturb other people, which is great. Because if you live in community with each other, it's like you're reading, just stop, you're being too loud. I will say, the other thing about the rule is, I think we're trying to translate this into maybe more secular spaces. The idea of the role of studying as a form of listening. And why listening is so important. The reason why I'm applying to study is I'm trying to listen to what scholars are saying, my community is saying, my context is saying. That's why study is so important. The discipline of listening. Okay. And I think this goes along with research. And I will say to my friends at Lee University, they really modeled for me what it looks like to encourage students to do research, right? And then there's prayer. People, the rule has lots of discussion about praying together. And of course that has value. Even if you're in the most secular spaces, I would make an argument that worship has value because it's the greatest way to encounter humility. When you realize there are things bigger than you, it's really important. And I think one of the crises we're seeing in people who are 18 to 25 or 30 is that they're not understanding that there are things much bigger than them, and it creates a lot of cultural pain. Benedict's 12 Steps of Humility. I can send you this if you haven't seen it before. We don't have time to go over it. So anyways, this was my argument for why this little rule can create a culture of wellness on our campus. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll be done. I hate the term wellness. I just really despise it. It's in my job title, so I have to use it. I would really like for us to throw the word wellness out and think about what we're going to be whole. Maybe it's much better. Because wellness, I think, is like Pilates, jumping jacks, and like me being super fit. And I walk in this space and be like, I don't think we're getting there today, Rob. But what is it? I mean, and I think when I talk with my students, they lean in when I talk about what it means to be whole. Wellness is like, I get it. Especially in our campus, 60% athletes. They're in the best shape they're ever going to be in their life, right? They don't need one more lesson on why running is a good thing, but they need to know why their life feels so separate, broken apart. Okay, there you go. Questions, thoughts, comments.
Thank you so much for this. This is St. Benedict. I've heard little bits and pieces of, but I've never gotten such a kind of cohesive overview. And I definitely want to add this to my list of to be read books that is growing every day. But one of the things that I found myself thinking a lot about was how these different elements can be applied in a single class as well. This semester, I'm actually teaching fully asynchronous online. It's kind of a new experiment for me, and building a sense of community and wholeness is something that I've just been wrestling with. Because it's a different context, but I'm seeing how these different elements really could be incorporated in one class in terms of how to create community, how to create those kind of rhythms of prayer or reflection or contemplation, even within just one class, in addition to maybe looking at campus applications too. So thank you for that idea, because this is something I'm going to be chewing on a lot as I keep building these classes.
And you what you're doing is the hardest thing, right? It's how do we create community in a group of people that are never going to meet? I know one of the challenges I had seen, and maybe you do this already. I had a course called Finding Your Way that I was doing. When COVID happened, we had to shift it on. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not good for the class. And I had students, they had to meet with me for 20 minutes face to face as we started the course. And there I asked people a set of questions, and part of my agenda was how can I connect with other private, right? As soon as you mentioned to me that you love bass fishing and so and so loves bass fishing, I said in an email follow-up, I said it's so great to meet you. If you know Tony also loves the bass fish, you should connect with him. Now did it work? I don't know, but that was the only way in the beginning. Because people say like use discussion boards. I haven't experienced discussion boards creating community. It's students who go to the same person they know. They're like, great thought, Tony. So. And what have you seen so far in your experience?
Oh goodness, kind of a range. I have a couple of students that clearly want to connect with others, but then I've noticed, this is just anecdotal, that the online asynchronous model tends to draw specific types of students who have either struggled in traditional on-campus classes and are trying kind of a second attempt, or students whose schedules are very inflexible and they're trying to complete degrees when they're working jobs. So there's some different barriers, I think, to a sense of community. But I mean, you never know if something's gonna work until you try it. So this really has given a lot of food for thought. I mean, I even think too about practices of hospitality in an online setting and what that might look like and how it might look different. Or even just in informal conversations or emails or short video messages talking about the sacredness of the work we're doing. Things that I might talk with students in my office on campus, but may not necessarily think about in an asynchronous environment, so.
Thank you for sharing, I really appreciate it. Yeah, other thoughts, comments?
The work, I think anybody at this conference feels a deep commitment to what they're doing. They sure they need a job, you can get a job lots of places, so I don't know that administrators, now that I am one for the last 3 months, mean to, feel, but I do think they do, and I think there is you talked about how the mission driven school has a workaholic. I mean, I think that rang true to me in just a deeply felt way. It's like, we're always asked, and of course, if you're still here, you're probably gonna say yes. So how to have a sense of pushback when it isn't, because I do have some copy, to be fair. Some folks you like to see feel more active, energetic kind of approach to things, but there are others that are just generally worn down. That aspect of Benedictine kind of life, that if you're, my marketing guy once told me everyone creates their job, and once it gets changed, then they get a new. And so I thought that was kind of a challenge. Definitely a challenge, because I think it comes from a really good, like most people I've met at ACI are really good people who really important work for some of the most desperately underserved.
Yep.
And I say this as a native Appalachian, kids that just needed it, some just by, you could say bad luck or blessing, depending on how you want to view it, where they're born, right? My children talk about this, about some of the struggles of our particular brand of Christianity where we are, and I thought, well, one way to see that is kind of impressive, that the whole world's against me, doesn't understand me. I said, but I like to think of the Appalachians like a briar patch, right? Briar patch, that goes back to the old stories of Bear Rabbit, wandered through the briar patch, right? Born and bred in briar patch, well, it gives you a sense of survival, a sense of creativity, a sense of agility that I think Appalachian has to teach. And this kind of spirituality, I think, because sometimes you get so driven, right? Just I want to help the next thing, I want to answer that next post. Like I just literally answered an email and I shouldn't have, right? You just feel worn down like a rag running out, right?
Well, I think that's to me the biggest challenge. I'm trying to lean in. There is a piece of Benedictine spirituality that's about the renewal of life. And while we would maybe talk about self-care, obviously Benedict's not using that idea, but there really is a benefit behind that. And I think for me, it's the idea of like, I have to stay balanced. And I know where my extremes are now. And I have to ask myself, and this is why I'm community building, someone's going to have to hold the mirror up to me and say, what you're leaning into this extreme because it's feeding something, and what's it doing for you? Right? And how is that not being fed by Christ? And you're letting work for you. And that's but I think because we don't have these deep level of community, but often we don't get there. Right. So yeah, in a transient, highly individualistic culture, the rule challenges us and invites us to say, don't fall in love with that fad. Come back to the things that we know actually lead to.
Because trust is so low. If you're gonna be gone and you're like, I want to listen to you.
Yep, bingo. So excellent. Thank you. Thanks for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day. And I guess we're done. So be safe going home.
So it's a monthly requirement that they have to attend like